What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be talking about a film I got to check out a little bit early, and that film is called September 5th. Directed by Tim Fehlbaum, who wrote this film alongside Moritz Binder and Alex David, this film stars people like Peter Sarsgaard, John Magaro, Ben Chaplin, Leonie Benesch, and many more. Hey guys, thanks so much for clicking here on my video. Always appreciate you guys stopping by. If you're new here, definitely want to ask you to consider subscribing to the channel, as I have a lot of new early reviews here on the channel all the time. And if you're a returning viewer, well, thanks so much for stopping by once again. Going into this one, I knew nothing about it. I don't know if it's called September 5 or September 5th. I'm assuming it's September 5th, as it is referring to an actual date and an actual event, and we're going to get into that in just one second. But I received a digital screener for the film a little bit early ahead of its release in December, so I figured let me go ahead and check this one out, especially since it has some pretty big names in the mix. With all that said, let's get into what this film is all about, and then we'll get into my personal thoughts on the film. September 5th takes us back to September 5th, 1972, during the Munich Olympics in Germany. Unfortunately, an event would end up happening known as the Munich Massacre, where a group of terrorists known as the Black September would end up capturing about 11 Israeli athletes and holding them ransom. Their demands: they wanted a group of over 200 Palestinians to be released back in Israel, and a group of other prisoners that were part of the mix as well. And pretty much what you have here is a group of Jews who are being captured on German soil being held ransom, just a few decades shy of the events of the Holocaust. So there's a lot of tension in the air, there's a lot going on in this film, and what makes this film unique is that we're not watching the events of the terrorists, we're not watching the events of the athletes who have been kidnapped. That is a part of the film in a huge way, but primarily this film is being shown to us through the voice and through the eyes of a group of ABC newscasters that were there specifically for live coverage of the games. This is a group of sportscasters that are there for the Olympics specifically, but now find themselves being the main news group that's there for the Olympics, and they kind of completely pivot in terms of what their goal is. And the rest of the film specifically takes place in this studio, in the control room, as we see them trying to navigate, sending cameramen out and try to get the best shots and get all the information they can to get the news of what's going on with this storyline to the world. As the movie would say, over 900 million people would end up seeing this live televised event over the course of 2 days, where we would see this unfortunate massacre known as the Munich Massacre. And this would end up changing live television as we know it, especially when it comes down to news moving forward. I believe it said that this was the first ever terrorist event that was ever captured in live television. And what we see here with this film is a group of characters who ultimately want to get the truth out there, but also a group of characters in the mix who just want to get the scoop. They want to get the shots, they want to get the ratings, because they know that the more eyes they get on this and the more scoops they get, that they're the first ones to cover it. They're the ones that kind of blew the story up. And there's a question of integrity throughout the course of this film in terms of getting the right facts out there, and what should we show? Should we be filming specific things? What if somebody ends up getting shot? And we see a kind of diverse set of outlooks in terms of the people who are working at this ABC studio in terms of how to handle this and what's the moral thing to do in terms of giving information, whether they know the full facts or not, to the general public. And as I said, this would end up changing live TV as we know it. And I think it goes without saying when you look at the modern day world today. I mean, the amount of just crazy news that we see all the time, it's no doubt that the world of live TV and news very much wants to be about getting the scoop, trying to get the thing that they can kind of break early. And there's so many like tabloids nowadays, something like a TMZ, who's known for, you know, releasing images and things that people shouldn't see, things that don't need to be out there just for the sake of having a scoop. And so this film kind of showcases the time where this really changed, as this was the first ever televised terrorist event of any kind. Going into it, I really wasn't familiar with this story, so I can't really speak to exactly what is different about what really happened here. And of course, this movie is primarily being focused on the people behind the televising part of this with ABC. So as far as the legitimacy of how everything played out here in these characters, obviously I have no idea, but I thought that this film brought up an interesting question about morality when it comes down to newscasting. You know, there's a group in this world that is all about just getting the scoop, getting the clicks, getting the views, and then there's a group of people who want to kind of have a sense of integrity and make sure that they're giving people the genuine facts. And sometimes those things don't kind of align, sometimes those things don't come together, and you ultimately have a divide in how to approach things that ultimately makes creating news and releasing news a very bleak thing. A lot of the movie is seen specifically through John Magaro's eyes as the character of Jeffrey, who kind of had to take this on on himself. He has to kind of figure out how to figure this out, send people out to get the right camera shots. He's kind of directing this whole event. And at times, he's all about trying to get the right shots, get the scoops, get all the information we can so we can get it out there to the general public. Let's get on top of this as quick as we can. But there are moments where he has to question whether or not what he's doing is right. And ultimately, he doesn't know how he feels about the events that are taking place here. And now his team of people, especially his boss, played by Peter Sarsgaard, is handling all this. And something else that's interesting about the film is that the film is placed in Germany just a few decades after the events of the Holocaust. And one of the characters that we focus on here, who is German, who works at this ABC studio, is Leonie Benesh's character, Marianne. And she's a character who the events of this really weigh on her. Her parents maybe were a little bit more in line with what was going on with the Holocaust, but she wants to separate herself from that. She wants Germany to be in a new place. She doesn't want the history of their country to kind of align with her specifically. So here she is now, covering this whole event and being a part of this televised situation where there are Jews being captured on German soil once again, and she feels a great sense of shame. And she was a character that I felt a lot for throughout the course of the film. With all that said, I think September 5th, in terms of filmmaking, is a very well shot film. There's a nice indie approach to the film. The film is very dark and bleak a lot of times, which very much fits the overall tone of the story that we're seeing play out here. The performances throughout the entirety of the film are incredibly realistic. I don't think there's a single cast member in this film that gives a poor performance, with Peter Sarsgaard, John Magaro, Leonie Benesh, and Corey Johnson being some of my favorites in the mix. And everybody else in general, I think, gives a really solid performance throughout the course of the film. With all that said, though, I do think this is a film that's really going to be dependent on your personal taste and your personal mood going into it. Having seen the film, it's undeniably well made, it's undeniably well acted, and it's undeniably real. It feels very real. It feels like it's a tension heavy, real story that is incredibly bleak and somber and very much weighs in the heart when you think back to a lot of these tragedies that have happened in society, and the fact that this will kind of pave the way for how live TV and news coverage will kind of handle things moving forward also kind of, makes you think about where the world is today. With all that said, this isn't really a film that's interested in a 3-act structure, and I do think in some ways that kind of held things back for me, because you just feels like you're watching the events of this play out over the course of 2 days, but there isn't really a beginning, middle, and end to the movie. There's just kind of events going on, and you have these guys trying to figure out how to get the best shots and the best, scoops throughout the course of the film, and ultimately the film eventually comes to the end. And as I already mentioned before, this is about something called the Munich massacre, so you can only imagine what ends up happening. But it's one of those situations where it just kind of came to an end. It tells the story it needs to tell. I think it's effective in what it is, but it ultimately isn't really a film that I can see myself clamoring to revisit. And I think that's okay. Sometimes movies with heavy subject matter aren't necessarily the films that you need to revisit often, but I think it's worth saying, because I think that there are going to be some people who watch this film and may be a little bit turned off, might find it to be a little bit boring and a little bit uneventful, that they might appreciate what the film is trying to say and kind of appreciate the somber story that's being told here, but that they may not be as captivated in the film. Because I think one thing that I kind of struggled with this film is that there wasn't a lot of characters to really care for, because the script isn't really trying to give you, again, a 3-act structure where you get to know these characters. It's not a film that's really about trying to get to know these characters more so than it is trying to show you a specific snippet in time. When it comes down to that showing a snippet in time, I think it really succeeds in what it is. But unfortunately, as the film played out, I would be lying to you if I said I wasn't a little bored in moments and I wasn't a little bit underwhelmed with zero ability to connect with characters. If there was any character I connected to, it was the character of Marianne that I mentioned before, because I think she's the only real one that's given some real meat on the bone to really care for. The character of Jeffrey, played by John Magaro, also is a character you can feel for, but it really isn't until the latter part of the film that you feel for him more, because majority of the film he just feels like he's on the go trying to get as many things as he can in front of the news for people to see. And it was an interesting outlook on these characters, but it wasn't really a film that was built in a manner for you to really care for the characters you're seeing here or feel overly conflicted by them too many times. There was a bunch of characters in the mix that are just there to kind of serve a utility in the story, and it didn't really allow for me to connect to what was specifically happening, other than connecting to the fact that this happened in a true life event. That's really the main part that had me emotionally connected, was just knowing that this really happened to people, less so than what the film itself is actually relaying to me and the characters I'm watching in this iteration of the story. With all that said, though, I think September 5th is a really solid watch, and I think it's worth your time if you're looking for a realistic, real story that gives you something without trying to be cookie cutter about it in any way, shape, or form. However, I do think it's a film that will turn off some, and I do think it might bore others, and I found myself somewhere on the middle in the film. I found it to be very well made, very well acted, but I wasn't compelled to rewatch this film, nor could I say I'm even really overly compelled to run and tell people to go watch this movie. I think if you watch this review and you're interested in it, definitely check it out. I don't think it's a bad film, and I think there's gonna be people who like this film a lot more than me, but I just don't necessarily know if it's a film that I could say is 100% worth your time in a world where there's a bajillion movies to watch and people would only have so much time to sit down and watch a movie. But if you're into more realistic stories that tell you something serious and show you a more bleak outlook of something that really happened, then I think this is definitely the movie for you. So that's gonna be my thoughts on September 5th. Definitely leave some comments down below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Whatever the case may be, I'm always open to various opinions, and I do think this is one of those films, especially with the sensitive subject matter, that is gonna have differences of opinion, and it's one of those movies you kind of have to embrace the differences of opinion. So with all that said, hit that like button down below, subscribe for more early reviews like this one, comment your thoughts on the film, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.